Hi, it's me. No matter where you live in the world, you probably think that you have at least some way to get out of your country. You know, like there has to be an airport or a seaport nearby. Right. Well, not exactly. In fact, scientists have discovered what they believe is the most isolated spot on Earth, somewhere so remote you can't get there unless you want to spend a very long time walking. This truly mind-boggling place is located in the northwest of Australia. And since it's about as far away from everything else as it's possible to get, the people who are trapped there might never escape. So today, we're going to tell you all about it. But before we do that, make sure you click the like button, because otherwise, you won't be able to see our future videos. And if you really want to stay up to date with all our content, then make sure you click the subscribe button as well. Thanks for your support. Right, let's get into it. As we said, this is officially the most isolated place in the world. And if you want to go there yourself, you'll need to travel over 600 miles from the nearest road and nearly 900 miles from the nearest airport. It is so far away that the emergency beacon in your iPhone will simply give up looking for a signal, and you'll find it extremely hard to even get mobile phone reception. It's called the Little Sandy Desert, and it's a vast expanse of absolutely nothing. The closest population center is the small town of Newman, which has around 1,000 residents and is about 740 miles away. But it gets better or worse, depending on how you look at it. There's actually another settlement closer to this place, but it's not exactly close. We're talking about the Aboriginal community of Pangur, which is still 373 miles away. You'd probably imagine a place this remote would be completely empty of people. But Pangur has a population of around 280 people. They mostly live in a traditional manner by hunting and gathering food, and they only have access to one very bad dirt road. When it rains, they're effectively cut off from the outside world until the weather clears. During the wet season, their only hope is a helicopter dropping off supplies. The area around Pangur is rich in natural resources such as gold, copper, lead, and zinc. But having to get to these minerals is a bit more difficult than normal. And this means that while other places in Australia are mining operations, employing thousands of people and bringing in millions of dollars, Pangur and the wider region barely scrape by. For example, between 2006 and 2011, the average income per person in the area was just $70. Of course, sometimes being this far away from civilization has its perks. If you want peace and quiet, then this is as peaceful and quiet as it gets. In fact, when researchers first tried to set up camp in the area to conduct scientific experiments, the local Aboriginal people told them to go somewhere else. They said that the desert was too sacred to be occupied by outsiders, and to this day, almost nobody goes there. It's believed that between April and October, nobody stays in the Little Sandy Desert, and between November and March, it's only ever been occupied by 3 groups of researchers, 2 of whom had permission and 1 of whom didn't. But as you might expect, the isolation means that no roads or electricity will ever come here. That's why the average income is so low. When explorers first came across the area, they named it the Great Sandy Desert after the endless sand dunes that covered the landscape. But this isn't entirely accurate. Despite the name, it's not actually desert. The reason for this is that it receives around 15 inches of rain every year, which is nowhere near the 10 inches that you need to classify something as desert. But because there are no trees, it doesn't look like a typical rainforest either. There are several different types of habitat found in the Little Sandy Desert, including salt lakes, rocky outcrops, spinifex, grasslands, and sand dunes. The dominant vegetation consists of small shrubs, grasses, and herbs, and these are perfectly adapted to survive the harsh conditions. Some of the animals that call the area home include the bilby, the burrowing bitong, the rufous-haired wallaby, and the red kangaroo. It's quite remarkable that the Little Sandy Desert hasn't changed much over the last 10,000 years, especially considering that the rest of Australia has undergone significant changes during that time. A good example of this is the Great Victoria Desert to the south, which was once covered in eucalyptus forest. But these were cleared by Aboriginal people who used the wood for tools and weapons. The Little Sandy Desert is also home to some interesting rock formations, including the so-called lobster pots. These are tall columns of rock that look like giant pieces of toast sticking up out of the ground. They were created around 1 billion years ago when molten rock pushed through cracks in the Earth's crust. Over time, this rock cooled and hardened, forming vertical columns. The most famous example is called the Eye of the Shark, and it stands at over 55 feet high. But as we said earlier, the lack of roads and airports means that getting to the Little Sandy Desert is no easy feat. And that's why scientists have struggled to study this unique environment. In fact, It was one until the 1960s that any systematic study took place, and even then it was only because a research team received a grant to specifically study this area. Before then, the only real exploration of the area was done by 3 prospectors in 1897. Since then, the only other expeditions to the area were done by Aboriginal people who knew the land like the back of their hand. The research team in the 60s reported seeing a group of 5 Aboriginal people who were traveling on foot. Even they looked surprised to see the researchers, and they asked them how they got there. When the researchers explained that they traveled by plane, the Aboriginal people were shocked. They thought that flying machines were a myth. Sometime later, the team saw another group of 5 Aboriginal people and asked them the same question. Again, they were surprised that the researchers arrived by plane, but they explained that they themselves were on their way to visit friends who lived 320 miles away. This meant that they were walking at least 64 miles per day, which is an incredible feat considering that they had no roads to follow. As you can imagine, walking for days and days without coming across another human being takes a toll on the mind. In fact, it's so mentally challenging that several of the researchers broke down and cried during their trip. One of them later said, "I started crying uncontrollably. I wanted to go home. I remember thinking that this desert was hell." Another researcher said that he wouldn't trade the experience for anything in the world, explaining that it taught him a lot about himself and the strength of the human spirit. Of course, those researchers were only there for a few weeks, but for the people of Pangat, this is their reality every single day. As you might expect, life in this remote location is extremely tough. The average weekly wage is just 40 Australian dollars, and many people rely on government benefits to survive. The community is cut off from the rest of the world for most of the year, and it is hard to get fresh food. It's definitely not a place for people who need constant excitement and stimulation. But for others, it's a paradise. Now you need to watch What If Everyone on Earth Lived in One Country? Or have a look at Who Rules the World?